four main pilots, you know, looking at children, looking at employment, health and well-being, and housing. One of the things that we've learned from the children's pilot is that people don't always, and families don't always see a green space in front of them, even if it was under their nose. It doesn't always resonate with them. So you have to find a way of making a park or a green space have meaning to people. And we've done that in Dorbury Fields, one of our pilot sites. We've even launched a crowdfund to support the local slow worm habitat there, and we've actually reached our £2,000 target. That's testament to actually how you can actually activate a park and make it mean something to people. From an employment pilot as well, a lot of the work that we're doing here is around breaking down the stereotypes about who works in a park. So we've got a skills showcase that's on YouTube, which shows a range of different people. Not as much diversity as we'd like, but you know, I usually stand up like a sore thumb in most meetings around green spaces. There aren't often very many Pakistani Muslim women talking about green spaces, but there's about 20,000 people like me in Birmingham, and very few talking about this in our city. So that's the kind of things that we're trying to change as part of employment as well. Health and wellbeing perspective, you know, we're seeing social prescribing, you know, increase, and we're now trying to get green spaces into that space as well. One thing about COVID-19 though, we know that people are scared to leave their houses, especially if they've been shielding or they've been isolated. But we've also shown in our work that you can actually virtually connect people to nature. Obviously, it's, you know, being in nature and being outdoors has great physical benefit, but also connecting to nature. The work of Miles Richardson in Derby University has really shown that for, you know, people to notice nature, hear birdsong, see how leaves change colour. All those things also contribute to our health and well-being. And we've shown it's possible to virtually connect our older residents, you know, 70, 80-year-olds who can't leave the house, and allowing them to actually connect to nature and see how that improves their actual health and well-being as well. And also housing has become really important for us because not everybody lives near a park. Even though Birmingham has 591 parks and open spaces, not everybody lives close to one. But people do have green space immediately outside their house. So how do we help them to use that in a meaningful way? So we've now got a programme around generating communal gardens for residents, and breaking down some of the barriers and the processes that often, you know, within a council people have to go through to enable that to happen. I'm just going to skip some of this and probably end on this, Nigel, because I'm conscious I'm probably approaching my 10 minutes. I've talked about justice already in our work, and for me, this is what the Future Parks programme is about. It's about fixing the system so that people have a more equitable access to nature. What we've got here is a picture of 4 trees, and this tree is an apple tree, and there's 2 different individuals here trying to get the apples from different sides. So that the very first picture shows a very unequal picture, whereby because the tree's bending to the left, most of the apples are falling down to this individual. So this one doesn't get any. Equality is about, you know, leveling up, giving them both tools to, you know, giving them both equality and tools to be able to access what they want to access. So this has actually made it easier for this individual to get the apples, but it's still hard for that individual to do so. So then we'll talk about equity. And equity is about when you give people who need more, who have less but need more, actually give them more help and resource. So here, this individual's actually now got a bigger ladder to put them on the same level playing field as the other one. But justice, that's what we're talking about, is fixing the system. Justice here is fixing the tree so it's straight, and justice is also this individual on the right using their own resources to help the individual on the left who hasn't got enough. And that really is what we're trying to do in terms of nature, change the way in which our population feel that disparity in terms of accessing it. So I'm just going to finish on this slide, which is kind of essentially, you know, this is our team, a fantastic group of people who are working on future parks. And I'm conscious, yeah, I'm probably about 11 minutes now, Nigel. So I'll stop there, and very happy to take any questions, but also to be contacted afterwards. Nigel's got all my contact details, so very happy to have those shared.
That's great, Hamira. Thank you very much indeed. I know you're pressed for time, so we've got a little bit of 5 minutes perhaps for questions. Please, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat and I'll try and get them to Hamira and other speakers as we go. If I can kick off, Hamira, I was particularly, I suppose, impressed with what you said about making parks more meaningful. I think that's a great idea. And also going beyond parks, that idea of engendering some sort of ownership of community open space that is not necessarily seen as a formal open space or a formal park. But the real challenge, I guess, is, you know, I'm a former planner. How do you, in terms of planning policy, increase the ratio of green space in urban areas? Has there been a positive decision at the City Council to not develop areas for housing and actually put in green space?
I wouldn't say we've got as far as that yet, Nigel, but one of the things that we have done, and I think has been an impact of FPA, is we've got our future city, our future city for 2040, and that's being developed. And there's a really strong theme here around the city of nature, and actually wanting Birmingham to be a place where actually people see it and immediately think of nature. So even though we might not be building more parks necessarily, the way in which planning and policy is moving now is where buildings are being made. How are we making sure that nature and green space is completely integral in that? So in terms of even, you know, having green infrastructure which kind of goes up a building, not just, you know, on the ground floor. So there's a definite shift, I would say, Nigel, in terms of how people are thinking about green space. Birmingham it's a huge city and it's growing, and people need places to live, and that isn't going to go away for a while. But yeah, I hear your point. I don't think we're quite there yet, but we're definitely getting to a different place.
Definitely in the right direction. A couple of things coming up on chat. Helen says she's been thinking a lot about how big a part landowners and landlords have in this. Have you had any sort of discussions with landowners and trying to influence the way they think, if that's possible?
So we're looking at kind of around the use of growing, the use of land for growing. We see lots of, you know, not all of the land, obviously the green space is owned by the council, a lot of it is privately owned as well. And we've now actually got some initiatives whereby, you know, we're having success by, and this is happening from the community actually, where they're negotiating with private landlords. Like, there's a bit of space here, green space, it's being littered, which is being used as a dumping ground. Let us take it over and actually make it something positive. And that's kind of just, I mean, it's been going on for a while in some parts of Birmingham, but definitely there's a much bigger call on that. And we're trying to kind of develop a bit of a process and a how-to guide. So, because one thing that often happens in these situations is you have to know the right person to go to get things going. Yeah. But what happens if you don't know who the right person is? And that's where the equity issues come in and the kind of disparity. So yeah, really good point, Helen. And we're seeing that kind of work successfully, but we need to find a way of making it accessible to everyone to work in that way.
Finding the movers and shakers. I think that's something that Tim will be wanting to comment on later, having read his book. key influences, isn't it? Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Charlotte asked, can you talk a little bit more about the virtual sessions in the Whitton Lakes pilot?
Absolutely. So we worked with a community organisation who already had good relationships with local residents, and right at the beginning of lockdown back in March last year, they actually spent time training up the residents, the people in their 70s, 80s, how to use WhatsApp, how to use Zoom, got them technology, and that actually set them up in terms of trying to tackle the isolation, because a lot of these people, they couldn't have anybody visit them as well. So once they got comfortable with doing that, we had kind of the workers at Community Lodge, at Whitton Lodge. We've got Whitton Lakes literally on the doorstep of this community organisation, and the staff would go around the lakes making videos of bird song or on a walk. They've trained up staff in terms of doing sensory walks as well, and taped those, and then literally they just play them back in these virtual sessions to people. And the impact it had was quite incredible, you know, evoking memories, bringing people back to a space where they remember being really positive. We even had kind of elderly, you know, people in sheltered housing, in residential care homes as well, growing sunflowers as a competition. They couldn't grow them together in their garden because they couldn't actually congregate, but they could do it in their homes. They were given sunflower seeds, a bit of compost and a pot. And I'll just show you one of the things that I got involved in. I produced a video with my little boy Issa just to show the world how easy it is to plant the pepper seed. And this is about 4 or 5 months ago. And I don't know if you can see them, Nigel, but
Yeah,
got 2 crackers coming on there. So yeah, even growing can be done virtually. So thank you, Rachel.
growing houseplants has become a major industry, I think, hasn't it, the last year? And it's interesting to see how we could perhaps use that to engage people more openly in the outdoors, if you like, as things start to get a bit more freedom, perhaps. I'm conscious of time. There are 2 or 3 questions which I'll try and run together if that's possible. There's a comment about the sharing of gardens, and have people started using front gardens more, where they can also meet and greet neighbours. And linked to that, people have commented on housing associations perhaps being interested in this approach too, and also a comment about the edible bus stop idea in Todmorden, where you know, a group of people have got together. I think it's incredible edible there, isn't it? Which is again a community group that have done a bit of guerrilla gardening, I suppose you'd call it, in places that perhaps have been forgotten. Any comments on any of that?
Yeah, we have another organisation called TORS, the Active Wellbeing Society, and if they were here, they'd definitely talking about guerrilla gardening. You know, there's lots of land in Birmingham which is just, you know, a bit unloved as well, and you know, people often go past it and think, oh, you know, that could be so much better, and it's surprising how simple, and you know, with just a little bit of support, so that what you can actually do to change that piece of land. So one of the things we're also working on for our employment pilot is building CSR relationships with construction companies. You can actually use their time. They've got their diggers, their JCB diggers, they've got their rotavators and whatever it is that they would normally be using, and actually using that as a way to actually connect them up to local communities who want that work doing as well. So, and that's been quite a positive outcome from our work as well. So a lot of this stuff can feel like it will cost a lot of money, and we're trying to break that barrier down, but actually saying, well, there are people who are willing to do it and people who want it done, and it's just a way of trying to match that up.
I guess it's really a campaign, isn't it? I mean, it's actually galvanizing a community to take this approach, and that community includes not just people living there, but it includes shop owners, housing associations, other landlords, etc. And if you can get everyone behind that, that's perhaps the way to make progress.
We launched a crowdfunding campaign, as I just mentioned, just to see what the response would be. You know, a lot of people thought, no way are people in that part of Birmingham going to be donating. But we hit the target, and you know, we can't yet release the name of the company who's given the substantial amount of money. They want to do that later on in the year. But they've donated nearly half of our crowdfunding target, because they're a developer. Yeah. So you know, there really is interest out there for this kind of stuff. You just have to put it out there and see what happens. Yeah. So,
well, I'm conscious you've got to go and collect someone, so I think we'll pause there. And can I, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much again for sparing us the time this afternoon. That's been fascinating and a really good opening to the session. As you've said, I'll be circulating the slides that you gave and also the chat, so you can see some other questions if you want to follow up on those. And if people are
absolutely, yeah,
I can.
And again, very happy to be contacted, Nigel, as well. And really lovely to meet everybody. Okay,
thanks very much.
I'll say goodbye for now. All right, thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Well, that was a good start, I think, folks. I hope you agree. Some fascinating stuff. We'll move straight on to Tim Gill, whose book, plug, I don't know if you can see that in my virtual background, called The Urban Playground, was really the initial idea for this session. It's a fascinating book. Tim is a long-standing advocate of children's play. And I remember you saying at one point, Tim, that it's useful thinking back to the way we played in our childhoods. And I thought, he's right. Growing up in the 1950s in northeast London, in an urban area, terraced housing, very few cars, we played out in the street, we chalked up cricket wickets on walls, we had our own speedway route around the road, and all sorts of things like that I think have become increasingly difficult. And I think the main culprit is obviously the motor vehicle, but obviously there's a lot more to explain than that. Tim, would you like to tell us what you found in your fascinating case studies and some of the lessons you think we can learn? Over to you.
Absolutely. And I have just shared a link with more about the book. It would be remiss of me not to do that. And I have some slides, so I'll get those up and running as well. So let's just do the necessary. So yeah, that's the book. And thank you, Nigel. And I'm trying to remember. So I'm speaking to you from Walthamstow. Is that the part of northeast London?
Gosh, it's my hometown, Leighton.
Okay. Well, yeah, just down the road. I mean, a mile or two. A very interesting case study, of course, with Walthamstow's Mini Holland project, which I won't talk about. But those of you who don't know, it was an ambitious program to promote walking and cycling in Walthamstow by putting in modal filters and improving public space and essentially, making it harder to drive around and a lot easier to walk and cycle. And one of the side effects has definitely been you now do see children playing in the street again in Walthamstow in little corners and pockets, which will, as I say, I won't dwell on it, but it has resonance for me. So while I talk, I am going to pick up your comment and just invite people in the chat to just think about, well, firstly, think about the kind of places you used to play, all of you in the audience when you were younger, and picture in your mind one place that you would say was your favorite place to play, and then just type it into the chat, okay, really briefly. So in my case, I grew up in a large village outside of Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire, and we basically had the run of the place from a fairly early age, 8, 9 years old. But there was a spot I used to gravitate to with my friends, which was a pond just on the other side of the railway line from the village, where we had all sorts of adventures. So yes, in the chat, few words, your favorite place to play as a child, and I will carry on with my talk, and I'll check in on that at some point. But childhood has changed, of course. The nostalgia bell is probably ringing, and this map that you're looking at, I think, illustrates some of these changes very well. So what you're looking at is what you might call the roaming range of 4 8-year-old children. But they happen to be, oh, I'm sorry, that's not supposed to happen. Who rings on a landline these days? Okay, so you are looking at a map, roaming range of 4 8-year-old children, but they happen to be in 4 generations of the same family who grew up in the same town. But they're in 4 different generations. So the big blob that you can see that takes up most of the map is the roaming range of the great-grandfather, and that's about 6 miles. And then you can see how the circles shrink until, well, somebody's being very persistent. I'm really sorry about this.
As long as it's not the tax man, you're okay.
He's in half an hour. Thanks, bye. Actually, I'm really sorry. Just give me a 30-second timeout, because this could be something that I need to attend to.
Sure. Whilst Tim's doing that, some interesting childhood play spaces coming up. So if you're not looking at chat, I advise you to. Fascinating.
Call on the landline. Right, the joys of Zoom calls from home. I'm going to move on. I can't actually see the chat. This is one of the. Are people putting stuff in the chat?
Yes, they are. Yes.
Oh, great. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
This is very. Chat 17. Okay, roaming range. I use that slide all the time. Most of my work and what gets me out of bed in the mornings is about reacting to, responding to, reflecting on this change, which I think is one of the most fundamental changes in the nature of childhood. And I'm not saying that we have to kind of turn the clock back, but what I am saying is that, this sort of sense of freedom and exploration is part of a healthy diet of childhood experience. It's part of a good enough childhood, and it's really my work aims to kind of compensate children for the loss of freedom that we're seeing from these sorts of maps. And I can see from some of the contributions, there were some fairly adventurous places that are resonant to us from our childhood, places where we could feel a sense of possibility and of who we were and what we could do, and if you like, get a taste of being a human being. So I'm going to talk about why is this? There we go. What do I mean by this idea of child-friendly streets and towns and cities? Why does this idea matter? And a few sort of closing thoughts and questions. So I've been lucky enough to get some funding and support to let me visit a bunch of cities in Europe and North and South America that have taken seriously the goal, if you like, of reinstating everyday freedoms for children, the freedom to play and the freedom to get around. You can see the cities on this map. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I'm going to pull together some of the key messages. And the thing that connects all of these cities is that their vision of child friendliness is one that I share, which is that a child friendly place really is about children's everyday freedoms. It's about what they can do and how they can get around. And this diagram tries to capture this, the two dimensions of child-friendly places. So one dimension is there are lots of things to do. There are places to play, nature is abundant, there are places for sport and recreation. Generally speaking, the things that children and family needs are close by. And then the other dimension is that mobility dimension. It's how easy is it for children to get around? Crucially, of course, on foot or by bike. It's only when you've got both a lot of choice of things to do and places to go, and it's easy to get around on foot or by bike that you're in that top quadrant, which is the child-friendly city or town. So what does this look like in practice? Well, here's a district that the planners may be familiar with. This is the eco-suburb of Vauban in Freiburg. And it's about 5,000, 6,000 people. It's apartment living, you can see there from the view. It's very green, it's compact, there's lots of facilities in the district. But the key thing about Vauban is that car ownership is very low. You don't need to own a car for most families. But if you do own a car, you have to park your car in one of 3 multi-story car parks around the edge of this district. So as a result, the whole of the outdoor space, the space between the buildings in this neighborhood, is available for public use, for social use, for play, for meeting, for teenagers to hang out, for growing. And I've been lucky enough to visit twice, and both times the space under the sky was full of people, including children with and without their parents. So here's a couple of images. That's a couple of the multi-story one of the car parks. There's very good public transport, so people don't need to use their cars. An image of one of the streets, give you a flavor of what this place is like. Now, so that's it. I call it my ultimate child-friendly neighborhood. But the interesting thing for you in Norfolk is you've got, okay, a smaller scale, more modest, but it's not a million miles away from Vauban in its conception and in its execution. And this is Goldsmith Street in Norwich, which I'm hoping will be familiar to some of you, which won the Sterling Prize 2019. It's a development of nearly 100 council houses. And it's, again, a strong commitment to kind of environmental principles. The houses are all zero emission. Here's an aerial view of it. And again, you can own a car if you live in this estate, but the car parking is around the edge. And so you can see that ribbon, almost like a kind of alley, a back alley with gardens which runs left to right, and a central square are effectively places for play and interaction and socializing. And here's a nice image. I think this must have been a launch event or something. By the way, I haven't been to Goldsmith Street. I've been keen to visit, and then, you know, things happened. But I'm guessing it will be fascinating to have a look around. So that's the time. Pardon?
You must come and visit us.
I will do so. Yes, I'm very happy to accept an invitation. So that's the kind of, you get the picture. Compact, green, easy to walk around, and lively and engaging. Why does this idea matter? Well, firstly, it matters because it's what children, whenever we take the time to ask them, is what children say they like and want in their neighborhoods. And also is, of course, healthy for children. And we know about all the problems around child obesity, but also children's mental health and well-being. The second reason is, which I'm trying to sort of engage planners and designers and developers with, is that if we ask ourselves what a child-friendly place looks like, I've just shown you, it looks like a sustainable place. It looks like a healthy place. Really, we're talking about the same thing here. But the third reason why this idea matters, I think, is perhaps a bit less intuitive. And actually, there are some hard-nosed economic reasons why city leaders should be thinking about becoming more child-friendly. So I make no apology. In my book, the very first paragraph of my book talks about this case. Some of you may be familiar with. So this was just before Christmas. An inquest deemed that the tragic death of 8-year-old, I think, Ella Adu Kissi Debra, was partly because of the air quality where she lived, which is just moments away from the South Circular Road in London. And so you have a case where in the 21st century, effectively the kind of urban planning features of the places where we live are killing children. I mean, that really should be shocking to us. And of course, there are other health consequences as well. But as I've said, on perhaps from a different perspective, children themselves, when we take the time to ask them what they like and don't like about where they live, are really describing the kind of neighborhoods that I've just summarized for you. And some of these ideas are neatly brought together under a slogan that's associated with the mayor of former mayor of Bogota, Enrique Peñalosa. And if you don't know, Bogota, capital city of Colombia, not, it was a really tough, it was basically a city that was failing. And Peñalosa and his colleagues have turned the city around, and one of their maxims is this maxim of children being an indicator cities for species for cities. That in the same way that if you see salmon swimming up a river, that's a sign of the health of that habitat. If you go and you see in a neighborhood children of different ages, with and without their parents, active and visible in the streets and public spaces, that's a sign of the health of that habitat. But the third point I made about why this idea matters is brought out nicely by Rotterdam, a city that I devote a whole chapter to in my book. And so Rotterdam, in 2006, a survey showed that Rotterdam was the worst city in the Netherlands to bring up a child. And anybody who knows about the Dutch will know that that's not great. That is not something that you'd be wanting to sing about if you were a Dutch city. So to their credit, Rotterdam city leaders realized they had to do something about it, and they spent probably more time, money and energy than any other city on earth in making their built fabric, the streets, the parks, the squares, the public spaces of the city more child friendly. And here's the economic point, is that they realized that families who could were fleeing the city. They were moving out. And over this period since then, Rotterdam has turned that around. And they can show that families are moving back into the parts of the city that they've been addressing with this program. So I think that economic case is quite compelling. So that's, I hope, a flavour of why this idea of child-friendly planning and design matters, and what it looks like. I now just want to sort of close with a few, I guess, conclusions and questions. Nigel, you did correctly point out the impact of the car in all of this. Of course, there are other reasons why children don't have the same freedoms to get around today as in previous generations. There are cultural reasons, there are reasons to do with the changing rhythms of family life, the growth of technology, lots of stuff like that. But I believe the most important factor is if you like, the 100-year hegemony of the car, that we baked in car-oriented design and planning into the towns and cities where we live, and that, you know, cars and kids are not very compatible. So the challenge in turning this around is really, it's a moral and political challenge. It's not a technical one. It is about arguing for, again, to use some of Hamira's ideas about fairness and justice, spatial justice, if you like, for children. And that's why my book is very clear. It is not enough to create playgrounds. I'm not saying playgrounds are worthless places. They're not. They need, certainly on a lot of playgrounds, are rather sad in design terms, but there actually has been some good work done on playground design. But you can have, you know, as many lovely playgrounds as you like, but if children are not able to get around and visit these places on their own, then they may as well be, you know, on the other side of town. I also argue that children's participation is not enough. And this is, I actually think it is important to bring children's voices and children's views into these debates, and to make sure that what we're doing in, you know, making places work better for children is grounded in their lived experience. So I'm not saying, you know, this is all about doing stuff to children. It is about doing stuff with children. But what I'm saying is that we also need the adults involved to have a picture and a sense of direction about what child friendliness means. And we can't rely on children and young people themselves to come up with all the answers, because some of these questions are complicated. For instance, questions about how you make places less car dominated. And the last question I put there, I'm thinking, you know, has some relevance to people in Norfolk. I will put my hand up and admit that most of the cities that I visited are fairly urban. There are some rural fringe parts to some of them, but this, you know, the work, the thinking, the research, the case studies are largely in more urban contexts. So I think there are some tough questions about what this means in rural areas where, you know, car dependence is all the more prevalent and arguably, at least in the short term, essential. But I've got a little bit of good news about that. But I just wanted to pick up on the kind of moral point here. This is a tweet that went around a couple of weeks ago. I like the simplicity of this. It's like, okay, you want a skate park, you want to play space in your street. Actually, it's not that difficult. You stop the cars coming through. Job done. Of course, that is difficult, but it's not a technical problem. It's not a design problem. It's a problem of who has the right to set the rules for what happens in streets. I come up in my book with a model for taking programs forward, and I just wanted to share that because I know there are some people from local authorities in the audience. My book, by the way, is strongly aimed at local authorities, at leaders at the local level. Of course, there are national policies and implications that drop out of my arguments, but you know, most of the levers of change, most of the delivery services that we're talking about, parks, streets, planning, urban design, housing, actually reside at the local level. So I'm offering you a model here, and at the heart of that model is a champion, somebody at the municipal level who takes up this issue. They may be in parks, they may be in urban planning, they may be in public health, they may be a cycling advocate, or working in the development control. But the point is that they have the ability to reach out and get things to happen in different departments, to look at involvement, to look at evaluation, to have a focus at the neighborhood level, because children and families don't live in cities, they live in neighborhoods. And that you get that link with space and mobility. So just on the rural point, I think there is now, we're seeing some work. This is a slide that I grabbed from Jenny Wood, who's a researcher and consultant who runs an outfit called A Place in Childhood, based in Scotland, is doing some really interesting engagement work in very rural areas. And you can see some see the example of that on your screen. So I'm optimistic that interest is growing in bringing children's voices and views into the picture. And so my closing slide is actually from Paris, not one of the cities that I looked at in detail, but I think it shows the work that's going on in Paris around creating the kind of 15-minute neighborhood, greening the city, opening up public space, reducing the impact of the car, promoting walking and cycling. And this, this is a global city that is whose response is grounded very strongly in the responses that we need to make to the climate crisis. And I think it's that, I guess the message I want to leave with people is that one of the strengths of bringing children's views and voices into all of this is it helps us to focus on the longer term. It helps us to focus on our collective response to the challenges we face in towns and cities. And it helps to overcome some of the vested interests and the kind of narrow short-termism that can sometimes be a barrier to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Brilliant, as usual. Fantastic. I was taken particularly, I suppose, with what you were saying about not just relying on playgrounds, the sort of designated play spaces, which sort of rings again, I think, with something that Hamira was talking about, this notion of looking beyond the park to more informal spaces. And I guess, the knock on from that is taking a very different approach to urban design, really, isn't it? And I think Goldsmith Street's perhaps the example of that we have locally. What do you think?
Yes, it really is. I talk in the book about kind of turning the playground inside out. So you think about, playground. One of the good things about playgrounds is, they can be playful places. They're places where there are lots of. A good playground has different offers for children. For children who are physically active and interested in climbing or spinning or swinging, but also children who prefer more social interaction, or who are interested in in nature or in building and construction and the joy of the sandpit. So my vision of a child-friendly neighborhood is about taking some of those ideas of, the jargon is affordances, offers to children from the environment, but instead of putting them all in one place and forcing children to get to that place, thinking about how those offers can be woven into the fabric of the neighborhood, while at the same time making it much easier for children to get around that neighborhood, walking and cycling. And in case you've missed it, one of the kind of curious things about this is, children play when they move and children move when they play. So there's almost an artificial distinction here between the movement side and the play and social side. Anybody who spent 5 seconds walking with a group of children along a street with a low wall on one side will know what I'm talking about. Absolutely.
I'm picking up some very interesting questions here. I'll try and pick up some themes if I can from those. Questions about really. Okay. Questions about.
I'm going to just.
Okay.
Yeah.
Questions about how we, I suppose, galvanize communities to demand the sort of changes that you've been talking about. But on the opposite side, there will be, and someone has referred to them as the small vocal minority, I think, who like the convenience of having the car next to where they live. I mean, there's a real tension there, isn't there? Have you any thoughts on that?
There is. And there's, I'm in London, where there's a lot of low traffic neighborhoods have been introduced, these sort of, quick and dirty ways to reconfigure streets, reduce rat running and the dominance of the car in residential streets, open up streets for cars, for cycles and walking. It's been very controversial. Some people lose out. Some people find that the journeys that used to be easy are hard, and the journeys that used to be quick are slower. There is no avoiding that, okay? You know, it is spatially impossible to make it easier to walk and cycle without making it harder to get around by car. You can't do it. You need to bring people with you to an extent, but I also think you need leadership. And I guess you will, this may sound a bit harsh, but you know, if you as a decision maker are not finding that there are car drivers getting upset about what you're doing, you're probably not doing enough. I think that's one of the lessons from all of this. I think we also do need to do a lot more to help people change travel modes and to realize, you know, that actually a lot of the trips that they're currently making by car are not, you know, car is not needed. It's a little bit like Hamira's point about making people aware of their local park or green space, making people aware that, you know, that shopping destination that they think they have to get into a car to get to may only be 7 or 8 minutes walk away. It may be a thing that's very easy to do with an e-bike, you know, and a lot of people, e-bikes are big news to a lot of people. They've come on incredibly in the last few years and opened up cycling as a practical everyday mode of transport to a whole group of people, and in different ways with trailers and all the rest of it, that didn't, you know, used to be possible. And I've seen this in my borough in Waltham Forest, an explosion of different types of bike use. So I think I am very clear that, and I don't think anybody who's paying any attention does not think we need to get more people out of cars and walking and cycling if we're going to make a proper response to the climate emergency.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that thinking about children, it changes the terms of the conversation. So instead of you basically having, you know, you could picture two guys saying, you know, I want to be able to cycle my bike to work, and the guy saying, well, I want to get my van. And you actually, if instead of being two grown-up guys arguing about how they work, you bring in a child who's saying, I want to just be able to walk or cycle to school every day. I want to be able to get out of my door and go around the corner and see my friend without being worried that I'm going to get run over. You change the terms of the conversation, and you can't help but get the conversation going in a more about the public good and about the longer term. And of course, also garnering support from parents who are quite concerned about these issues.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, just picking up a couple of other things here, do you think the issues are different, more intractable in suburban and perhaps market towns? I mean, thinking again of the local context, obviously we have one largish city and a few more significant, perhaps coastal towns and market towns, but a lot of smallish villages where we don't have a very good, if any, public transport system. I mean, he knows from experience. The reliance on the car is that much greater, is it not? And much more difficult, therefore, to take away?
It is. And I think more work needs to be done about, if you like, you know, how you can retrofit and tackle some of these issues in more suburban and smaller habit settlements. But I also think, you know, and this is why Goldsmith Street, I think, is a lovely example, is that, you know, there's house building going on right now. And I'm sorry to say that a lot of it is just storing up these problems for the future. There was a great report from, I think it's called Transport for New Housing, who are an outfit linked to the, I think, the Foundation for Integrated Transport. Lynn Sloman was one of the authors, who's a long-standing transport campaigner. And it showed that even the so-called eco-towns and eco-villages that have come forward over the last 5 years or so, they're actually more or less completely designed around their working assumption that is everybody will drive everywhere, and that you know, so the car dependence is baked into them, and that is a planning issue, and it's also an issue where it's children growing up in those neighborhoods that are going to be you know, to lose the most over the long term through their own, you know, sedentary lifestyles, through the other side effects of excess traffic, and of course through a less effective response to climate change.
Yeah. Perhaps to finish on a positive note, what do you think about the time we're in now as a real opportunity to make a change? I mean, we've had a year of in and out of lockdowns where the benefits of the outside and being outside have perhaps become much clearer to people. And clearly we have the whole issue of climate change very much more to the fore now, and green, building back green and things like this is now a real opportunity to make the sort of shift that we need to make.
I hope so. I'm not under any illusions. I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough on public finances. There's going to be huge pressure to get the economy going again. Public transport is going to be a bit hamstrung for a while. But you're right. I mean, a lot of us, broad, huge members, cross section of the population, have been through a year of living more or less hyper locally, and it's brought home the value and importance of green space, of local facilities, and just of being outdoors. And I think that's particularly true of families, especially, of course, families who are in more difficult circumstances. I mean, here in London, it's very obvious who's lost out the most from this last year. It's families living in poor housing, with overcrowding, and in insecure, economic circumstances. I guess I feel like things are up in the air, so those of us who are motivated to get progressive social change on the environment, on health, on justice and equity, now is the time for us to get our act together. And again, another message from my book is, these different groups who tend not to speak to each other should be speaking to each other more. I'm really keen to get the cycling lobby, if you like, the cycling movement, thinking much more and actively involving children in their work. Likewise, if you like, the kind of environment and sustainability lobby. Surely Greta Thunberg is a wonderful example of how you can energize a sector that was perhaps getting a bit bogged down. I say a sector, you know what I mean, a movement, through the energy and enthusiasm and clarity of a young person's voice. By the way, that's the closing message. The closing paragraph from my book is celebrating the work that she did and the impact that she had.
Yeah, great. And I'll finish with one very positive comment from Sarah, who says she's very excited to get an e-bike. So there you go. Yeah. That's the way forward, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed, Tim. Fabulous presentation. And as you've said, really, I mean, a lot more in your book, which I can really recommend as a great read, and the fantastic examples from around the world that are in there, and your pointers as well, your pointers to the future, I think have been really helpful. I'm sorry we've not been able to answer everyone's questions.
I'll have a quick look through the chat and see if anything leaps out.
Fine. We'll move on. Anthony, welcome. Anthony Hudson, welcome, Director of Hudson Architects, who I've known for a long time. Used to be my neighbour, in fact, up the road.
Thank you.
Welcome. You're going to talk to us from an architect's point of view about what COVID means in terms of the future of design and planning. So over to you, Anthony.
Thank you very much. I think it sort of reflects, I mean, it's a very much of an overview, and it reflects lots of things that have already been said. And I think it's, and I think there's sort of optimism here, as Tim said, and and there's some things we've got to be wary of. But I think the last year has sort of brought accelerated trends that I think we've all seen before, but they've just concertinaed into probably into 5 years or 10 years into 1 year probably. And the things that we all are aware of is obviously the continuing and acceleration of shopping online, and also the move towards working remotely, working at home. And these have had significant immediate impacts on the city and our towns. And as Tim had just mentioned, that it's also kind of really made us focus on our local where we live. I think it's affected us more than most other countries, since we are predominantly 85% a service industry. So a lot of people are working for, more people working for, as a percentage of the population are working, in service industries and offices, and have the opportunity of working at home than any other country in Europe, probably. And therefore, what's happened is, by this refocusing on our communities, it's never been so more important to get on and talk and do things and shop locally than we've ever done before. And so, and how many people are going to voluntarily go back to commuting 5 days a week, spending uncomfortable and profitable time traveling, when it's been shown that they can do some really, really good work from home over some of those days? And certainly in my office in Norwich, we definitely will never go back to a 5-day week. We'll probably have a 3-day. A lot of people are wanting, they just find it much easier and more productive to actually working from home in those days. And this has been shown by kind of a lot of surveys that 88% of the office population don't want to go back to work to a 5-day week, and 4 out of 5 enjoyed working from home. So I think what we'll see is the footprints of offices reduce in size. Some will remain virtual. I know of a few architectural practices that have actually sold their offices already and are never going to go back to work as a fixed abode. But there is a real problem in this, is that the fact of those people who are kind of apprentices and kind of working at the coalface, so to speak, in the office and on the learning. And somehow we've got to kind of bring that together with this whole notion of working virtually. But there are other ways of doing it, and there can be neutral spaces where people can meet in urban surroundings, in cities or in villages. And I think we'll see the development of more hubs and more sort of office spaces which can be hired out or used by others. And the long-term issues, I think, are clearly a less footfall in city centres, and the demise of sort of coffee shops which you support that, and restaurants and the sandwich shop, lunchtime purchases and all that kind of thing. But this expenditure has either been kind of kept in people's bank, in lack of that expenditure, or it's been spent on their local village shop or their local town shop, or wherever they live, where they're living. And whereas residential suburbs have thrived, it seems, centres of cities and towns have had their life hollowed out. And this is evidence from changing in rental values. I mean, outer London boroughs have seen increases between 2 to 6% of rentals, while the inner city ones have dropped up to a staggering 15%. It's been meant, it has become less, it's become attractive for the less off. This has kind of got an interesting kind of follow through, is that possibly more people can be, it's more affordable for people to live in the centre of cities as the more wealthier people move out. And in Norfolk, we've seen a huge increase in kind of interest in properties in kind of countryside locations. But it really, I think, ultimately shows how badly we've allowed our cities and towns to become overtly, I'm talking about the city centres here, overtly focused on retail and offices. And it's a trend that it's gone on just for too long. I mean, retail was seen as a saviour for a long period in the late 20th century and early 21st century for keeping cities thriving. And it was everybody said it was kind of the wrong thing to do, but it was, our shopping spending habits were kind of there, and it was profitable. But that has now really been shown to be a shadow now as we're moving to kind of online purchasing. So what the cities should be, and I think Tim has illustrated, kind of, I think childhood friendly is a kind of a measure of a healthy city. I absolutely think that's absolutely right. And so these centres of cities, we've got to basically have an increasing significant amount of living space of houses, housing, and outdoor areas in these city centres. I mean, Norwich, within the city walls, England's once second city, currently has a population with its medieval walls that's considerably less than it was in centuries past. I mean, if we kept our residential populations in city centres with decent accommodation, we'd have a much more thriving centre. We would have we would have the day-to-day requirements of bakeries, grocers, cafes, corner shops and others. But these just can't survive when you don't have a good resident population. And we all know Norwich is after 5 o'clock, 5:30, the centre of Norwich is dead. It's just not sustainable any longer. But the recognition of getting the right kind of appropriate concentration of dwellings and people and cross sections of society and to create vibrant communities is seen in various programs, and it's always been mentioned as the 20, it's been called the 20-minute neighborhood or the 15-minute city, where most of people's needs are met by shops and places to work, restaurants and pubs and other social spaces which within these walking or cycling times. I mean, it means reduced car journeys, it means healthier lifestyles, healthier well-being and low carbon footprints and building resilient communities. And this has been happening in Melbourne and Paris, and they're putting this in place. I mean, a lot of people are getting really excited about it. And it was an interesting headline in the EDP that brought much mirth to its Norwich readers. Was a couple of days ago, the tight headline, "Should Norwich be more like Ipswich?" And Ghastly said one, but they completely missed the point, which was that Ipswich is looking at the 15-minute city as well and wants to be one of the first in the UK. And what is great about this notion of the 20-minute and the 15-minute neighbourhood is it's a very strong, simple concept, which I think people get hold of, rather than the planning speak we hear so often about sustainable and viable planning. But it does mean repopulating town centres with appropriate accommodation and which will drive the retail shops on the high street, as well as healthcare and other services that we need to visit in person, and things which can't be done virtually. But what is the right kind of accommodation in our towns? I mean, we can't have the predominance of the investor-backed 1- and 2-bedroom flats and houses. It's got to be much richer and much more diverse there. And we need affordable family houses with adequate outside spaces and rooms that allow families to live with each other in healthy ways. I mean, we had that awful period of taxing extra bedrooms, but these bedrooms are our future home offices as well. And it's interesting that one of the biggest kind of searches on Google has been for garages, people looking for garages because they want to convert them to, say, their second offices, their second, their first office, and they want rather than where they usually go driving during the day. So we don't want any more inadequate spaces or bedrooms, and so families can kind of live healthily together. And in England, we do actually have the worst sort of space standards in Europe, and we should be legislating for that. I mean, there are local plans in London which do that, but it's not that widespread. True, and we also should convert our redundant office spaces and retail spaces into housing. And first of all, above the ground floor level, to ensure that the ground is still kind of is still open and public as much as possible. But the government's current proposals for permitted development rights, encouraging more housing converted from other uses, is not the answer. I mean, yes, bring people back into cities and populate cities, but it's creating this initiative has created the most inadequate new housing conditions we've seen for a long time. It's uncontrolled, it's unregulated, and it's replicated the conditions that have given rise to, I think, what a lot of people would argue is for the rampant spread of COVID in some of our cities, where people are living together in cramped conditions, sometimes in some of these developments without windows or access to fresh air. And it just should, in the 21st century where we live, this should just not be acceptable. But instead, I think we've got to look to our, local authorities taking a much more proactive role in enabling a vibrant future for our high streets through intelligently repopulating them. And I think the planning system has a huge role to be playing on this. We should be looking for complexity of use and not single use. I mean, zoning again has been the bane of creating vibrant communities. We'll continue to look at those supporters. We need more and more supporters of this mixed use urban areas, such as, historically in the 60s, we were looking back at people like Jane Jacobs, who was a fantastic critique of this of saying how bad zoning was to the kind of life and vitality of cities. And in her book, a lot of people might know, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, it should be now resonating even more with us. And she said, I mean, she was an advocate of all the things that Tim has been talking about, and about cities being places where people are around, children playing, shopping, office workers are going out for lunch, and revelers late at night. So, and I think a lot has already been said about the importance of green shared spaces, places to play, and places to get outside, and they should be easily accessible. And finally, I think another thing that everybody's been talking about a lot also is the transport. I mean, it is crucial, and it's a bit more of a problem in less metropolitan areas like Norfolk and Suffolk, because I think we will still get people travelling to work, albeit less frequently. And they'll be coming in for sort of cultural and social activities, probably less for retail. So, and there's a fear, as Tim has already said, fear for using public transport. And we've got to get people back on public transport, and we've got to make it more acceptable and flexible. So I think this, so although bikes have been the big winners of the last year, we've got to really refocus on our public transport strategies. And what we need are much more dedicated public transport routes across rural hinterlands to connect our areas of growth and make use of enhancing existing infrastructures. For example, you know, the line that I use from North Norfolk to Norwich, from Norwich, you know, through Sheringham and Cromer and North Walsham, that should be a much, I mean, that should be enhanced. It should have much more regular service. And we also should be looking at kind of growth points along that route, so it enables much more easy kind of moving backwards and forward. So just a sort of quick roundup, it is, I think COVID has forced us to look at the way we live. It's not that this is new, but it's given us a new perspective of what is important in our lives. Spending hours commuting to work every day is not sensible or sustainable. We must refocus our attention back to the local. And this is exactly what the 20 minutes neighborhood and the 15-minute city do. And I think it's a good summary of, and a good kind of watchword to keep in mind for the future plans for our country.
Brilliant, Anthony. Thank you very much indeed. That's brilliant. I'm conscious of the time, but one of the things struck me from what you were saying was that planning system has got a role to play. And I'm just wondering whether, I suppose the implication of that is that the market left to itself won't be enough to make the sort of changes that you've talked about, particularly on the reuse of city centre buildings that perhaps were once retail or offices and turning them into housing. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think we know there's a lot of talk about the change to the planning framework. A lot of it interesting and good. A lot of it which would seem to take more participation out of everybody in the actual planning system, or actually happening too early in the planning system, and then things have been decided before actually people have got their head around actually what's going to happen. But it's got to be much. Things are changing on the ground much faster than planners and ever can get their heads around, or ever do their kind of 5-year, their planning, doing their 5-year plans and things like that. So it's got to be much more participatory in the future, and much more agile and much more open in terms of land use, in a way that can't be manipulated as well by the market.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Anthony. That's fantastic sort of end to the presentations this afternoon. We've got a bit of time, I think probably about 15 minutes or so, and I suggested in the programme that we split up into quite relatively small groups, 3 or 4, and really, obviously, it's an opportunity for you to introduce yourselves and make some connections, which has been, I think, one of the positive features of these workshops. But also, perhaps an opportunity to start thinking about what can we do in the Green Care Network, what can you do individually to promote more livable, greener cities and towns, obviously with particular reference to our local area. Norwich is the major city, but There are many other towns and cities and towns and villages of different sizes that we've referred to. So what can we do basically? So okay, if I do an automatic allocation, this will be a random thing. You'll find you'll be invited to join a group. It should be a group of 3 or 4 people, and I'll give you about 15 minutes to introduce yourselves and have some discussion around that topic. See you shortly.
week and I wanted to teach them how to do it, so I want to start we're looking at some stuff that we're interested in. So
hello, I thought I'd come and join you as you seem to be a group of 2. How are you doing both?
Good, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, pretty good. There's a bit of a buzz from somewhere, I don't know anyway. So what do you think of all that? Was that interesting?
Really interesting, yeah.
hello.
Oh yeah. Any thoughts on what we might do to promote that?
I've been thinking of lots of things.
I thought you might. Come on then, share them, Helen, share them.
We've got a page on the school e-magazine that was going out once a week, and we're sending out 5 ways of wellbeing packs and things like that, so we can kind of encourage the school children and the parents. We're doing recipes at the moment. We've got a basil recipe, and I took a photo of the basil plant, and I'm hoping to send that out, and I'd love to send some little pots and things. But if you encourage the families to understand how important it is and encourage them, and we've got the Beaufort Arts Festival coming out, which is obviously going to be green, but if you recognise through the website and through the letters that we send out weekly and help to bring the themes through and help people recognise how much it helps, then that's where it, and then get their stories back and get their good news stories, and so that you can share what's happening and stuff as well. So that's kind of my thought about it, and just promote it, let people know the benefits, and build just gradually, but it's all kind of sharing it from one at a time. You can't do everything. It's recognizing that actually there's lots of places doing it as well, so it's just sharing that enthusiasm with the people you're working with, because actually that's what draws people. It's not hearing about some big organization, it's about someone who they know, who spends time with them, shares with them, and then they share, and then they share, and that's how things spread, and that's how you keep the heart of it as well. So it's just, yeah, absolutely. That's my thought. There's lots of practical things as well that I've got.
You touch on an issue that I came across yesterday. I was in a webinar, it was a UEA webinar about what we should do in relation to climate change. It was talking about transformative adaptation rather than incremental adaptation, i.e. a major change. How do we make the major change that is needed, or the major changes that are needed? And one of the comments that came through was that in terms of the key issues that we're going to have to grapple with as a result of climate change is food security. You know, really that whole notion of we need to be growing much more of our own, healthily and correctly, if you like, closer to home. So what you just described, Helen, is a great way into that, isn't it, at community level?
And we're already using the NHS Eat Well guide and connecting with the Theatre Boyle and creative and different things like that. So we're kind of, and I'm working with a dietitian because I've done that, and So yeah, there's quite a lot of interesting things, and it's been really good as well because it's encouraged, like there's a group of people who would be in that vulnerable single adult mental health vulnerable category, and they worked on one of the recipes for me when they were allowed to get together and cooked it together and took the photos and then ate a healthy meal together, and it's like and they wouldn't normally have cooked for themselves. So it's really nice to see in all areas it kind of coming together, and when you can kind of link it to nature and creation and growing things and the sustainability and all of the nature, the cycles of life and everything else, just everything comes out of it. So.
And Holly, you're obviously involved in a couple of projects that are dead on with that, aren't they? With Papillon and Reefham School Allotment and Eves Hill Veg. I mean, you're involved with what, children and adults. Some of the adults, I think, have got, would you say, mental health issues, or do they come along to Eves Hill for a bit of therapy, or is it more volunteering because they just enjoy it?
I think it's definitely a bit of both. I think at Eves Hill it's kind of an indirect therapeutic benefit, really. It's just kind of socializing, connecting with people, connecting with nature, and just kind of even just witnessing growth or playing a part in the growth of seeds into food that we then eat. It's just this kind of cycle and this kind of repetition. I think I was talking to Hannah about it today at Eves Hill, and she mentioned a few people that kind of have been coming to the volunteering sessions that at the beginning were just kind of, you could just tell they just were really struggling with whatever stage they were in in their life, and like after a few months everything's just shifted. You can see they're just kind of so much more grounded, and I think it's just really important, just the small kind of moments in kind of, I don't know, interacting with people or interacting with nature that really make a difference.
Are you involved at all in the work that Eves Hill's now doing with families at all?
No, not yet.
No, I mean, I've seen it advertised. Hannah's told me a bit about it, and I think it's both at Booton and Aylsham. But I want to talk to her because I think you will know from the emails I've sent you that we've been successful with this funding for Families Connect, which is, starting off in North Norwich and that area where I am and where possibly you are as well, Reefham, Corston, Aylsham and South sort of thing. And I think that's something that we can perhaps plug into and enhance really for families that have been particularly traumatized or stressed, that have got particular problems as a result of the last year.
We've really found that for our volunteers, like one of the ladies had been in hospital and she really was in a hard place, but actually being able to step up again in lockdown has really helped her. And the volunteers who've been coming and helping, it's been really, really encouraging. And for my own mental health to be able to do it as well, it's been really lovely. But I did my peer support training with the Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust, and I've done my certified personal medicine coach training, and so I'm quite interested in that side of it, in the peer support. And the guy who's now our secretary, won't mind me sharing, I actually met him on a recovery college course originally, so it's quite it's really interesting to see how, and that's obviously one of the 5 ways to well-being, is making a positive contribution, to be able to be a part of a community. And it's just it's really fun.
Sorry to say that we're starting to sort of get much closer links, I think, with the NS Foundation Trust you mentioned, and Mind as well. Paola Colombo, I think is her name. She's on the session today. I think she's acting as their sort of link worker for us, but there are a number of others who are on our contact list. So those relationships are starting to develop.
I've also got a friend through Soul Church, because I connected with them online. I'm part of their Thrive mental health group, and the guy who was on it actually did my interview when I applied for a peer support job in the crisis team. So he's a lived experience. So so I kind of talked to him about some of the NHS stuff and some of the things as well. But there's I'm still a student voice, but it's really, I've been really interested to hear about what you're doing about the allotment projects locally, Holly. Is it Earlham that you're doing it in, or Cossey?
I'm doing it in Reefham.
You're doing it in Reefham.
Yeah. So I think. Sorry, carry on.
Is there one that's setting up locally in Idle, or did I misunderstand that?
Well, Papillon is working in a number of places. Reefham was where it started. There is a very lively and, I have to say, fantastic school allotment being created at the City Academy, which is not far from you.
Oh, that's the Earlham one, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you may know there are a number of community allotments in the area as well. I think the Bluebell allotments have got a few, a couple of specialists. Martin, who's with us today, I think he runs one for the Matthew Project, and there are some other groups there as well. So yeah, I mean, things are happening, and Papillon, tell me if I'm wrong on it, because I'm maybe up to see, but I think Papillon is continuing to grow. I think they're lining up other schools where they're wanting to go. Heartsease, no, can't remember now. Another senior school in Norwich where I think they're going soon as well. How are you finding that work at Reefham? How often are you going in? Is it difficult at the moment, Holly?
Yeah, I think with COVID at the moment, it's not been a lot of kind of regular. I think it's only recently that we've been kind of working with kids again, but it's just been kind of maintenance of the allotment. But I've been doing most of the stuff from home, just kind of research project things. So yeah, but hopefully I think after Easter, just in time for the growing season kind of really getting started, I think volunteers can kind of start coming back and working with the kids. So yeah, I think it's all picking up again, which is exciting.
I saw an interesting news item today on a local news channel about the National Garden Scheme, where for a period of the year, you can open your garden and people come and see it and pay some money and it goes to charity. Well, they're interested, I don't know, because we were talking to the organizer locally about this. They're wanting to find some gardens in Reefham that could link up with the school allotment site, because they're keen to see the allotment site as one of the gardens that they'd encourage people to go and see. Not your normal sort of, pristine, pretty garden, but one that's going to be a lot of interest, I think, to people as well. So that's going to be an interesting development this year.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
We have a community garden in Bowthorpe, which is really lovely. We've got a heritage trust because we've got the ruin of the old church and the new church was built on it. And then we've got a bit of ground that the council gave a lot of years ago, which has got a community garden, and it's really lovely. So there's got a whole group of people, and a lot of people will just go there at different times of the day. It's been a lovely place. During lockdown and things. So connecting Bowthorpe and looking as a short-term thing, we're looking at potentially having a section of one of the big beds in the community garden and just working that. But we've got a student from the UEA who's going to be coming back in a couple of so she'll probably take the lead in that a bit, and we're going to just see how the interest in the community builds up, because if you put something too big, it's just too much. So we're going to just start small, and the school are also looking at doing some stuff as well with allotment stuff, and doing an allotment within
hopefully get to the point where that wonderful former youth centre can start to provide much more of a community base locally.
Well, what they told us they were putting in there, they've now put in Clover Hill Village Centre, so I don't actually know what's happening, and we need to chase up the council, and because the church is opening its toddler group in June without a venue from them. So.
Well, if you like, I'll talk to Greg Peck, who I think I mentioned to you. I contacted before when we talked about it. He's my local county councillor, but he happens to be the portfolio officer for property for the county council. So he was able to sort of make some inquiries of what they were looking at and any plans they had. So I think he said that when we talked about it, was last year, wasn't it? I think, Helen, originally.
Yeah, when they told us at the time they were putting children's services in, but they've put that in Clover Hill now.
Right.
I'm not sure what they're doing with it, but it's been empty for the whole year.
Yeah. Well, I'll follow that up and see if he can see whether there's any scope for.
Yeah, we need to look into some funding and things like that, because our funding all runs out at the end of March, and the person who's been doing it has terminal cancer. But we're linking with Community Action Norfolk a bit, and so we're kind of working on it.
Okay, I see we're coming up to about 1:30, so I'm going to disappear, and I'll just send a message around a couple of minutes warning. That's all right. So see you shortly.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about the other project that you're doing and the volunteering in this couple of minutes, Holly.